I'm joined tonight by our museum assistant, Olivia, who will be moderating the virtual part of tonight's presentation. And for tonight's program, we are joined by Schmidt House curator, Karen Johnson. In tonight's talk, Karen will explain how many famous people and events can be connected to the founder of the Olympia Brewing Company, based on the theory that anyone in the world can be connected to anyone else in 6 steps or less. Before we begin our program tonight, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement and some museum news. The Lacey Museum is on the ancestral lands of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian Tribe and Squaxin Island Tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who are absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial, and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854. All right, we'd love to see you at the museum. We are open Thursdays and Fridays, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We have a new original exhibit called Live from Lacey, A History of Local Entertainment from 1920 to 1980. The Lacey area has a rich and exciting history when it comes to the world of entertainment, and this exhibit features items from 3 organizations that were a central part of life in Lacey during this time period: KGY Radio Station, the Evergreen Ballroom, and the Lacey's Drive-In Movie Theater. Creativity Corner is back for the month of October, so stop into the museum during our open hours to participate in this fun and festive fall craft. You can create your own paper pumpkins to celebrate the changing of the seasons. These are for younger guests, but we welcome any age. Olivia and I have made pumpkins twice now. We are also selling Thurston County Historical Journals after the completion of tonight's program. If you're interested in those, they will be available on the back table. We can take card or cash payment, and they are also available at the museum. We hope you'll join us for our November history talk with historian and author, there he is, Drew Crooks. Drew will explore the fascinating history of Thurston County from far in the past to modern times. So topics will include Ice Age geology, Native American heritage, American settlement in the mid-19th century, development of towns and farms, labor unrest, Great Depression, World War II, post-war expansion, and more recent developments. It's going to be a packed talk. For tonight's presentation, we will hold our Q&A section at the end. We will do our best to get questions from our in-person and online attendees. For those online, if you have any questions you think of during the presentation, feel free to submit those using the Q&A button on your screen. For those in person, I will be walking around with a microphone so that folks at home can hear your question, and then we'll be able to hear it later on in our recording. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, Karen Johnson. So Karen Johnson is the curator of the Schmidt House, owned by Olympia Tumwater Foundation. Karen has been involved in history for over 20 years as a volunteer and a staff at various heritage organizations in Southwest Washington. She also serves as the editor of the Thurston County Historical Journal. Thank you, Karen, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Did I hear a frog in the room? Okay, odd, but it's one more audience member, I guess. So I first developed this slideshow to talk about, or to give at the Schmidt House, and I assumed that everyone who came to the Schmidt House already knew who Leopold Schmidt was. Does anybody here not know who Leopold Schmidt was? All right, you guys are in tune. Just in case somebody at home doesn't recognize the name, I'll give you just a very, very brief intro to Leopold. He, of course, was the man who built and established the Olympia Brewing Company back in 1896. And that same year, the brewery started marketing beer from Tumwater. The brewery was first called the Capital Brewing Company, though. Leopold Schmidt, because of his position as an entrepreneur, a major employer in the area, was very well known, very important in the late 19th and early 20th century. He knew everyone, and everyone knew him. So after he died, and after Prohibition was repealed in 1933, his family started up the brewery again in its most recent location, just slightly upriver, in 1933, and the family operated that brewery until 1983, when they sold the brewery out of the family and out of the stockholders' hands. It was bought by a bewildering mess of other breweries who constantly segued, bought, sold, merged, everything until the last owner finally closed the brewery down in 2003. But in those intervening decades, Olympia Beer was the largest employer for many, many years in the county. And it all started with Leopold Schmidt. So, why am I doing this? 6 degrees of separation from Leopold Schmidt. Because I can, that's why. 6 degrees of separation is the idea that anyone in the world can be connected with anyone else in the world by only 6 degrees. Often far less than that. Back in 1929, this guy on the left, and I have to look at the pronunciation of his name because it's not obviously obvious, Frigyes Karinthy, how about that, wrote a short story called Chains, where he made that postulation that any two people could be connected in 6 degrees or less. So you might know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who once shook Marilyn Monroe's hand. That was only 5 degrees, but at any rate. So many social experiments have been based on that theory, and it seems to have held true. So if it was true back in Karinthy's time in 1929, just think how many more connections we can make now that we have social media and the internet and cell phones and whatnot. So where does Kevin Bacon come in? Now, does anybody not know who Kevin Bacon is? Everybody recognizes him? Good. He comes in because back in 1994, he's an actor, of course, back in 1994, he was being interviewed and he made the claim that he had worked with everybody in the entertainment industry or had worked with somebody who'd worked with somebody. So these 3 college students, having nothing better to do with their time, decided that they would investigate that. And they actually created a website, an app, that you can still get to online. It's called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And if you go there, you can enter in an actor's name of your choice, and it will come up very quickly with how many degrees of separation that actor may be removed from Kevin Bacon. So Kevin Bacon can be related to Loretta Lynn because Kevin Bacon once, let's see, I guess I can use this, couldn't I? Hello, there we go. Whoa, too close to it. Okay, won't do that. Kevin Bacon once worked in a movie with Sissy Spacek, who I think portrayed Loretta Lynn. So there you can directly connect Loretta to Kevin Bacon. So that's the idea behind this whole thing. So let's see if we can do that with Leopold Schmidt. And I did this because, as I was explaining before we got started with the talk here, that I had a lot of interesting little vignettes, little stories about the Schmidt family, and none of them was big enough to make an entire talk from. But if I found a way to stitch them all together, it's like binding on a quilt. You can make a crazy quilt, which is just fabric that's stitched together. They usually look better if they have some common binding on them. So this is the binding, is this finally found a way to put all these stories together with a little bit of binding called 6 Degrees. So the Kevin Bacon, oops, I'm going backwards here, aren't I? The Kevin Bacon thing always uses movies or occasionally a TV show, but we're going to use some of that, but mostly it's going to be through other connections, other kinds of connections. And by the way, Every time I manage to make a connection, this slide is going to come up, and you all get to shout, Leopold Schmidt. So let's practice. Leopold Schmidt. Okay, there you go. Very good. For those of you at home, you also get to talk or to shout Leopold Schmidt. It'll make your family wonder what you're up to, if you're not one cheating the game, obviously. So here, does everybody know who Ray Charles is? I'm going to ask this question a lot because not too long ago, I mentioned the name Ray Charles to a 20-something, and she asked, who's Ray Charles? Oh, God. Makes me feel old, but that's okay because I don't know who Taylor Swift is either. Let's see, and we're having a little bit of technical problems here with the City Hall system, so Olivia back there is going to cue these sounds, and feel free to sing along if you want to. Whoop.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through.
Okay, that one stopped rather abruptly, but that's okay. Yeah. So that's probably one of Ray Charles' most famous songs. And some other songs that he was famous for. Shout them out. Anybody? Hit the Road, Jack. That's a good one. Any other ones? We're going down memory lane tonight, so. Okay. But while Ray Charles was being popularized on records, and songs and everything, he also made money by singing jingles. Olivia?
In a world that's always changing, there is something you should hear. Since 1896, there's been no change in holy beer.
We haven't changed the water.
You know, when something's really fine, you don't go around making changes, and that's what Olympia is all about. The same smooth, mellow beer year after year.
Oh, the greatest things in life don't change, and that's why Olay's grown. Like the good things you depend on, like a friend you've always known, and you know that a great deal shouldn't change.
That's the truth, y'all.
A great deal wouldn't change.
I want to tell you,
A great deal doesn't change, and Olay never will.
Olivia, isn't that great? And that, of course, makes our connection to, come on. Let's see, Olivia, I think you're going to have to click that one off. There you go. Yay! Oh, very good. You remembered. Good. Okay, good. So there are quite a few people who sang commercials for Olympia. And we might find another one here before the night is over. So who remembers Creedence Clearwater Revival? This has taken us back a few years. Yep, okay. They recorded a lot of great songs. They were only together for less than 5 years under this name. But think of the songs. You probably recognize most of these. Proud Mary, Who'll Stop the Rain, Looking Out My Back Door, Susie Q, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, The Midnight Special, and one of my favorites, Olivia, toe tapping aloud.
Someone told me long ago, there's a calm before the storm. I know it's been coming for some time. When it's over, so they say, it'll rain a sunny day. I know, shining down like water ever seen rain? I wanna know, have you ever seen rain coming down the state? Yesterday and days before, the sun is cold.
Okay, well, I can listen to that all night, but anyway, we've got to move on. So, do you know where the band got its name? Creedence Clearwater Revival? They had first been known as the Blue Velvets. Isn't that a nice name? But maybe not indicative of what kind of music they sang. And then their manager changed the name to Gollywogs. The band members hated that name, so back in 1967, they decided they wanted a new name that the band members liked. So they sat around, I think they were sitting in somebody's living room and thinking up names and whatnot and throwing out ideas and killing some and whatnot. So by the time they reached Creedence Clearwater Revival, or most of it anyway, they'd chosen the name Creedence to honor Creedence Newval, who was a co-worker and friend of band member Tom Fogerty. And then they thought Revival because they were hoping to revive the band by choosing a new name. But Creedence Revival just needed something else to it. So while they were sitting around having this brainstorm session, they had the TV on in the background. And a commercial was playing. And the voiceover on the commercial happened to be saying something about the pure, clear water used to make Olympia beer. So they liked that phrase, clear water. So they became Creedence Clearwater Revival. Yay, okay. Okay, on to something completely different. We all remember General Douglas MacArthur, I assume. So MacArthur served in the U.S. Army in almost every rank possible. He joined the Army in 1903, and he served until 1951. He served in World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. He got lots of medals. So if you think of MacArthur, and I'm sure you do think of MacArthur often, how do you picture him? How do you picture him? Is there anything iconic about him? The pipe, okay, what else? Yeah, and I shall return, yeah. As he, when coming up to World War II, MacArthur wanted to reinvent himself. We'd call it branding now. He wanted to brand himself. So that's when he adopted his own design for a hat with lots of gold braid on it. He adopted the aviator-style sunglasses, and he also wanted a pipe. He used to smoke cigarettes, but he wanted something a little bit more forceful and memorable than just a cigarette. So he wanted to get a pipe, but not just any pipe. So he talked to a place called the Missouri Meerschaum Company, which made corncob pipes. And he said, I want a pipe this way, that way, looks like this. And they designed a pipe specifically for him, to his design. And so he ever afterwards used that pipe in all the photos that he had. He carried it with him every place. So a little background on the Missouri Meerschaum Company. It was started around 1869 by a Dutch immigrant and a woodworker named Henry Tibby. Actually, I'm not sure if it's pronounced Tibby or just Tib. We'll go with Tibby. He was a woodworker in Washington, Missouri, and a farmer requested him to make a corncob pipe because the farmer wanted a pipe. And Tibby worked on it a little bit, and so he produced one and then thought that might be a good way to make money. So he started making corncob pipes, and he patented his process. In 1907, the company changed its name from Henry Tibby and Son Manufacturing to just Missouri Meerschaum Company. So this ad is from sometime between 1883 and 1907. You can still get a MacArthur-style pipe from Missouri Meerschaum, and it'll cost you under $30. So in case any of you guys, well, let's not be sexist, anybody out there wants a Missouri Meerschaum pipe that looks like a MacArthur pipe, you can get one. You can also get a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses called the General, and that'll cost you more than $30. But what's our tie-in here tonight? Well, back in the mid-1860s, a young German man was sailing around the world, not as a passenger, but as a working sailor. And he'd been on the seas for a year or so and decided that he wanted to try being land-based for a while. So he got off a ship in the Great Lakes area and eventually worked his way down to Missouri, where there was a large contingent of German immigrants. And he knew mostly sailing, but he went to work, got a little job with this Henry Tibby. And this young German helped Tibby invent some new ways of making corncob pipes, ideas which Tibby later patented. And after being there for a few years, the young German man heard about a gold rush in Montana, so he made his way to Montana with his brother and a couple friends. After spending some time in Montana mining the miners by building sluice boxes and cabins, he started a brewery in Butte, Montana. And after he built that into the largest brewery in Montana, he moved on out to Tumwater, Leopold Schmidt. So that's how we can tie General Douglas MacArthur to Leopold Schmidt. Okay, again, something completely different. We're bouncing around today. Everybody remember the Pentagon Papers back in the 70s? It was shocking news starting in 1971, and it all had to do, of course, with the war in Vietnam. Some government officials had compiled a top secret report, a huge report, volumes worth, of the history of the Vietnam War and how different presidential administrations had lied to Congress and had lied to the American public about the country's involvement in the war, and in fact, that the government wanted to sustain the war and keep it going. So it was big news. But some anti-war activists found out about this report, and they decided it was too important to keep secret anymore. So they essentially stole the documents, copied them, and released them to newspapers. And the two guys who were responsible for this release of papers were Daniel Ellsberg and Tony Russo. Ellsberg got the most press, but Tony Russo was right in there with him. Up until this time, the government pretty much dictated to newspapers what they could report. And this broke the bank, so to say. Ellsberg was definitely the ringleader, but Tony Russo was his second in command, and Russo actually did all the physical copying. And back in those days, they didn't have automatic feeds. It was take one, put one down on the copier, pull it out, another constant shuffle. And he spent nights and nights and nights doing that. They both were eventually arrested for theft, conspiracy, and espionage. All the charges were later dropped due to a mistrial. At that time, Ellsberg was seen as a psychiatrist, and President Richard M. Nixon's reaction to the publication of the whole Pentagon Papers involved two Nixon aides breaking into the psychiatrist's office trying to get dirt on Ellsberg, or at least enough information to discredit him. Nixon even went so far as to order a dozen CIA assets to assault or even assassinate Ellsberg to get him to shut up. So this was pretty heavy stuff. And all this, of course, was kind of a precursor to Watergate, which led to Richard Nixon's resignation. And a large segment of American citizens really found that to bring about a total distrust of the American government. But most importantly, probably, it put a stop to newspapers kowtowing to the government, and instead freedom of the press. So it was a big deal all the way around. So again, how does this tie in? It's a long lead up. But during the midst of all this hubbub, Tony Russo over there on the right met a young woman named Catherine Barclay. She was also an activist, and so they had mutual interests. And after knowing each other only for about a month, they got married. And so she sat with him through most of the trials and was also very much included in everything that he went through. But who was she? Who was Catherine Barclay? She was an anti-war activist. She was an agitator. She was a very outspoken feminist. She was also the great-granddaughter of... Yes, and I've actually met her. In 1972, here in our archives at the Schmidt House, we have a letter that Bobby Schmidt, who was then running the brewery, he wrote to another family member. We have all seen the news clipping of Kitty's wedding. They called her Kitty instead of Catherine. And I couldn't help but note that it had to be a rather strange wedding, as the groom was smoking a cigarette at the time. It is too bad that a youngster like Kitty, with her background, has been duped into a life pattern that is anything but godly and Christian. I feel so sorry for her parents. The only thing we can do is hope and pray that something good will come out of it eventually. But as of this particular time, it looks rather bleak to me. Well, the marriage lasted only 3 years, so I assume that everybody finally got their wish. Okay, now from heavy stuff to light stuff. Anybody recognize these kids? Yeah. So if you're around my age, and it looks like most of you are, we all have gray hair, you remember the Dick and Jane books. In fact, that's how most of us learned to read. Later, Sally was introduced, and these were pretty much white bread stories about kids in very simple language, and so to teach us how to read. They first came out around 1930. And they were, about 1960, the editors and publishers of the Dick and Jane series were looking for someone new to illustrate the books. The previous illustrator had either retired or passed away. I wasn't able to find out. So they looked for a good illustrator, a good storyteller, and they came up with this guy named Richard Wiley, who lived in Portland. And he was chosen to illustrate the books only for about 5 years, because in 1965, the publishers decided there wasn't enough lingering interest in the Dick and Jane series to continue publishing them, so they were all retired. But Wiley was very proud of his work there, and he was especially proud of being the illustrator who got to introduce African-American kids and families to the Dick and Jane series. And even though he did the Dick and Jane books, he was also a commercial illustrator. And he worked for big name clothing brands, drawing ads for them. And you'll recognize most of these names, I assume. Jansen, like Jansen swimsuits. Pendleton, woolen mills. White Stag. I bet most of us women have worn White Stag clothing. But he also did advertisements for... And you can see down here his signature, Wiley. So of course we know who started Olympia Beer, Leopold Schmidt. So that's how we can connect Sally, Dick, and Jane to Leopold Schmidt. Now again, a big jump. Kurt Cobain, everybody knows who that is. I think even 20-somethings would know who Kurt Cobain is. And of course he was born just west of here in Aberdeen. And he went on to found the band Nirvana. So you can call his music whatever you want to, grunge, punk, alternative rock, just ugly music, whatever. Anyway, I don't like it. That's why we don't have a recording here. It might be hard to sense a connection between Kurt Cobain and Leopold Schmidt, but we'll see what we can do. So Nirvana first released its first album in 1989. And in 1992, Kurt Cobain married Courtney Love. I bet you've all heard of her, too. And just let's see, that was in 92. And in 94, Kurt Cobain committed suicide. And not even a year later, Courtney Love, widowed at this time, decided to buy a property. And it was this property pictured here, a big house out on the Delphi Road, just west of Olympia. So that's where she lived for a while. And You can see on this property record from the state archives that here's her name down at the bottom, Love Cobain, Courtney. And going back up in time, or actually in the past in time, you can see highlighted in yellow at the top, St. Placid Priory. Back in the 40s, that same property was owned by, believe it or not, a group of nuns. So talk about soup to nuts. From, almost literally, from a group of nuns owning that property through several other owners to Courtney Love. Well, there's another name in the mix, and that's Robert A. Schmidt Jr. So in the 70s, I think it was, yeah, he owned that property, and he, of course, started working at the Olympia Brewery as a young man. He gradually climbed the ladder until he became vice president of brewery operations in 1980. And of course, Robbie was the great-grandson of Leopold Schmidt. Okay, now we're going to get back to movies. Some movies, anyway. Recognize her, Terry Garr. Even if you don't know her by name, I'm sure you recognize her face. And here she is in Tootsie, one of my favorite movies also. She starred in a lot of movies back in 1970s and 80s and whatnot. Oh God, with John Denver. She starred in Young Frankenstein, or Frankenstein, if you care to pronounce it that way. Also Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Well, before Terry Garr was famous enough to star in movies, she starred in commercials, like this one. Olivia, if you please. Oh.
Maybe the nicest thing about going away is coming home. Home to quiet walks with a friend. Talks about things that don't really matter. Or maybe just laughing over a beer. We make Olympia for times like these, and we brew it with the best water we know, the naturally pure artesian brewing water of Tumwater, Washington. It's the water that makes it Olympia.
Okay, Olivia, if you can click on that here. Oh, wait. Back. Okay, sorry about that one. Leopold Schmidt. All right, good. Okay, sorry. So this next story is my favorite one, I think, just because it's pretty improbable, but it's also so direct. And that is, of course, Homer Simpson. How in the world can we do that? Olivia?
Welcome to the Duff Brewery. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard the rumors that a batch of Duff was contaminated with strychnine.
Strychnine? Right. That's news to me.
Are you sure? Well, everyone's talking about it. It was even on CNN last night.
CNN?
Oh, no.
No, I didn't see that.
Whoa.
Well, it's not true. Let's go. Now, here's one of our favorite Duff beer commercials from the early 1950s.
Only Duff fills your Q zone with pure beer goodness. So drink up, and up, and up! Duff Beer, proud sponsors of Amos and Andy.
We're proud of all of our Duff commercials, but here's a very special one from 1960. Well, I would suggest, Mr. Van Oker, that if you knew the president, that was probably just a facetious remark.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
I would like to take this opportunity to express my fondness for Duff Beer.
I'd also like to express my fondness for that particular beer.
A man never drank a Duff in his life.
And here we have Duff, Duff Light, and our newest flavor, Duff Dry. What does the future hold for Duff? Let's just say we've got a few ideas up our sleeve.
Like what?
I'd rather not get into it right now.
Why not?
All right. We don't have any ideas for the future. We got nothing. Happy?
No.
Now, this is the most important man on the tour. He's in charge of quality control.
Fine, mouse, rat, fine, syringe, fine, nose, fine.
Let me just say, you're doing a great job, Phil.
Hey, thanks a lot. That makes it all worthwhile.
Okay,
Gummy
that's enough.
beer.
Okay, that
Hey.
one was so relevant. Taking a tour of the brewery. Any rate, so back to things at hand here. So Homer Simpson, the whole Simpson cartoon series was of course drawn by Matt Groening, and he based a lot of that the characters on his own family. They probably didn't appreciate it, but it made him famous. So Matt's father was named Homer Groening, and Homer was born in Saskatchewan, but he grew up in Oregon, around the Portland area. He served in the military in Korea, and when he returned stateside, he got a job with a company called Botsford, gosh, I can never remember this, Botsford, Constantine and Gardner, which was an ad agency in Portland. So he worked his way up the ladder and eventually became a vice president, and he worked on accounts like Janssen, again, Pendleton Woolen Mills, and Idaho Potatoes. He helped make Idaho Potatoes a household name. He also managed the account for Olympia Beer. And that's how we can connect Homer Simpson to Leopold Schmidt. Now, we get a couple more connections here because Matt Groening, the cartoonist, is also connected to the Schmidts because he attended the Evergreen State College at the same time that Bobby Schmidt, who was a grandson of Leopold, was on the Evergreen State College Board of Trustees. And also, here's another connection. When Homer Groening was managing the Olympia Beer account at the ad agency, he was also managing the account for a company called Western Hotels, which at one time was co-owned by the Schmidt family, along with a couple other people. The Schmidts were more or less forced to get out of the hotel business in the 1930s when they started making beer again. Long story, not going to go into it. But the other co-owners kept that company alive and eventually changed the name from Western Hotels to Westin Hotels, W-S-T-I-N. So if you have ever stayed in a Westin hotel, you're staying with a chain that used to be run by the Schmidts.
Leopold Schmidt.
Yeah, yes. Okay, Mel Brooks, everybody knows him, so he's an ultra-famous funny guy. Can we connect him to Leopold? Let's find out. So, anybody come up with some names of movies that were directed or produced by who? High Anxiety is one. Anybody else? Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. That's an old one. 2,000-Year-Old Man. No, any more? Yeah, well, again, Young Frankenstein. A lot of crazy films, but this is about my favorite here, is Blazing Saddles. So, in real life, Mel Brooks was married to actress Anne Bancroft. You probably recognize her. She was very famous in her day. Her probably best-known role was in The Graduate. But she also, early in her career, starred in a Broadway play and in a movie called The Miracle Worker. And she played the part of Annie Sullivan, who was a teacher to a part played by Patty Duke. And Patty Duke portrayed Helen Keller, exactly. So the real Helen Keller, the real life Helen Keller she was an activist in her day. She was an author, she was a lecturer, and in 1943, she toured the West Coast. When she came out to the West Coast, to the Olympia area, she gave a lecture in Olympia, and she was here in town for a few days. And while she was here, she stayed with Elsa and Fred Schmidt in their house out on the bay. And Fred, of course, was the son of Leopold Schmidt. So that's how we can connect Mel Brooks to Leopold Schmidt. Okay, now, oops, wait, I forgot this one. So we have in our collection at the Schmidt House a letter that was written and signed by Helen Keller. She, of course, had her, it was not Annie Sullivan at that time, it was her second companion who wrote the letter for her, but she signed the letter thanking Fred and Ilsa for their hospitality in having her at their home while she was here in Olympia. So I'd be remiss if we didn't cover Kevin Bacon in this whole thing. Can we connect Kevin Bacon, who started this whole 6 Degree business, can we connect him to Leopold Schmidt? Let's try. So as quite a young actor, Kevin Bacon starred in a made-for-TV movie called The Demon Murder Case. Yes, it was a scary one. One of the other co-stars in that film was Andy Griffith, and we've heard that name before. Olivia?
The boy. The killer. And a family fighting for its very survival. Ken Kirchhoff, Cloris Leachman, Andy Griffith, Eddie Albert. In the world premiere movie, The Demon Murder Case, a week from tonight.
Okay. That was a scary one. I have not found it on YouTube, but it looks like it might be worth it. Anyway, so Andy Griffith is our key connection here. So when Olivia plays this is just the opening credits to the Andy Griffith Show. Pay particular attention to the voice, doing the voiceover, the announcements here. We'll come back to him.
The Andy Griffith Show, starring Andy Griffith, with Ronnie Howard. Also starring Don Knopf.
Okay, come on. There we go. Okay, so the man doing the voiceover was an actor and voice actor named Colin Mayle. And he did the voiceovers for the opening credits on the Andy Griffith Show for about 5 years, first 5 years of the show. This was only one of his gigs, though. He also did other voiceovers and acted a bit. And in fact, he got to appear on camera in one Andy Griffith episode where he played a game warden. And he actually got to give Andy a ticket for fishing without a license. How about that? Sheriff Andy was in trouble. So Colin Mayle, along with his other gigs, did this. There was a few glitches in this earlier, so we'll see if we can.
It's the water that makes Olympia beer. So refreshing. Enjoy Olympia beer, like Olympia beer.
One of America's exceptional breweries is located at Tumwater near Olympia, Washington, where a naturally perfect brewing water flows cold and pure from deep artesian wells. This rare water brings out the delicate flavor of the finest hops grown in the rich, fertile valleys of the West, the goodness captured in choice, sun-drenched grains. Yes, it's the water that assures the distinctive character of light Olympia beer.
It's the water that makes it refreshing. Enjoy Olympia beer.
Visitors are always welcome at the Olympia Brewing Company, Olympia, Washington.
And that, of course, brings us to... So now we've got Kevin Bacon himself connected to Leopold Schmidt. That's all I've got for tonight, but remember that you are now connected to Leopold Schmidt because you've all listened to this talk. I work at the Schmidt House, so that's like 2 degrees of separation. Thank you for coming tonight.
Alrighty, folks, we are going to move into the Q&A section of tonight's talk. So as a reminder, folks online, that button to ask a question is on your screen. And then for folks in person, I'll walk around with the microphone if you have a question. So just raise your hand.
No questions. Perfect. We can go home and watch the game. All right.
I just wanted to comment that Kevin Bacon has been sighted at Olympia. He and Kara Sedgwick have a son who attended Evergreen.
Really? Wow. Huh.
Somebody online has a quick question, and it's, was the gardener of Gardner Advertising related to Booth Gardner? Do you know?
Oh. I don't know. I haven't investigated that, so I have no answer. But that's a good one. Maybe we can find 1 or 2 degrees of separation there. Anybody else? Well, in the future, I'll be looking for other little vignettes like this that I can stitch together, and maybe we'll have a second edition of 6 Degrees. All right, thanks for coming.